Lorenzo, great to have you here at Ambrosetti. And I wonder about how you actually see the global economy developing right now. It seems that the US is starting to look a little bit more decent. Even Europe, okay, China, let's not talk about that, but let's just focus on these two areas. How do you judge it?
Well, the US is getting better. I think the policies have worked. Now the big question is how to get out of these policies, at what pace. And the question for the rest of the world is what impact this will have on them, in particular for Europe. Higher interest rates at a time where the economy is still not really growing, and on emerging markets. So what's happening in the US is, again, of interest to everybody else.
We're talking about Fed tapering, to be precise, and as soon as this month, the markets have already reacted, emerging markets have already reacted, so the markets wouldn't necessarily be happy. But if you think about the message, if the Fed starts to taper, means that they're looking at a little bit more bright future, they're a little bit more dovish.
No, we know that they have to get out from these exceptional measures sooner or later. I think it has to be dependent on the growth in the US. But growth is better, so this has to happen. I think the markets need to be reassured, and the rest of the world has to think how to adapt to that. And this may require some changes in policies.
Okay, so how would you say they should adapt? What are the right steps?
Well, in Europe, higher interest rates at this time are not necessarily good because the economy is behind the US. So we may need to compensate in Europe with more accommodation, more expansionary policies, in particular monetary policy.
So the easy money that we've been seeing coming through from the ECB has been helping so far, but you think it's not enough, that it needs to go on?
Well, the ECB has committed to keep interest rates low, but the markets are not convinced. So, they may want to repeat their commitments, but at a certain point they may need to put the money where the mouth is, as we say. So we may have to expect something more if the ECB really wants to give a help to the economy, in particular with a lower euro, because the euro is still very strong, and lower interest rates.
But the ECB can't do it all by themselves. So they're giving out cheap money. Is that cheap money really being used by the banking sector and also by the private sector to invest, continue to create jobs, and eventually get out of the crisis?
Well, cheap money is useful because it leads to lower interest rate. It helps all those who have to restructure the balance sheet. It's not enough. Growth is not happening in many countries because of fundamental rigidities. So there is a need to do structural reforms. And there is a trade-off because maybe the more money the ECB gives, the lower interest rates, the less pressure on the politicians to act. And that's a dilemma. Of course, it doesn't mean that you may want to have higher interest rates just to push the politicians, but the politicians need to act in this country.
This has been a debate for quite some time, Lorenzo. I've been following the ECB, I've been following you, what you've been saying when you were still working with the ECB. Structural reforms, it's not being implemented fast enough. And this chicken and egg, easy money, complacent politicians has been also going on. Where is the circle stopping? When do we really see, okay, we are starting to progress on the implementation of the reforms?
I have to say that this is not only a European issue, because if you go to the US, the Fed is doing all these QEs and nothing is really happening on the fiscal side. And we're going through another risk of a cliff. Japan is the same, easy money, but the third arrows have yet to come. Europe, in spite of all, is implementing tight fiscal policies, I think, all over Europe. It's a structural reform which are much more complicated. And I think that's, in the end, it's the voters, it's the people in the countries have to understand that, easy money will not solve all the problems.
And it needs to be fast, because all I hear is that US shale gas is really a game changer. Europe as a production hub, as a manufacturing hub, also because of that, is going to lose more and more investments. How do you see that?
Yeah, and with the international geopolitical tensions, the prices are going up, so the spread between US prices and European prices are going up. So we need to act fast. Unfortunately, in Europe, not only in Europe, but especially in Europe, we act when there is a crisis. So
it's been going on for the past 7 years, Lorenzo.
exactly. So you need maybe an energy crisis or You need oil prices to really jump higher to make... in the end, it's the national politicians who have to understand that they have to give up some of their own powers to decide together. And nobody wants and likes to give up power unless this is really necessary. And I think the European citizens have to put pressure on their own politicians to give up some of their own respective power to have a more coherent European policy.
How can they do that if they feel very patriotic themselves still? They don't still feel European yet, but they feel Italian that happen to be part of Europe rather than European. And by the way, we were born in Italy.
I think people have a concept of Europe which is maybe a bit contradictory in the sense that they don't want Europe to replace their own identity. But when there are issues that their own countries cannot really decide by themselves, then they may want a stronger Europe. So I think it's people may want a strong but selective Europe on key issues where Europe is losing ground. And this is one key aspect where Europe is losing ground. And I think Europeans in many countries don't necessarily see the need for their own countries to have competence if this competence is not there, if they are not able to have an impact on prices.
I think this is really interesting that you say, the people of Europe should give some power to European institutions. And what we've been also seeing over the last 2 days is there doesn't seem to be a leadership on a European level, B, real credibility and real visibility for Joe Blogs like myself when it comes to the European institutions.
Well, Europe is a process. I think the European elections next year will change things. In the end, people have to realize that the global economy is changing, that each European country by themselves are not sufficiently powerful, that we need to work more together, not on everything, but on some key issues it's needed. And of course you need leadership. And that's another issue because many European leaders have been selected not on the basis of the leadership, but often because they were not creating problems to the national leaders. So you have maybe figures which are not that strong, just not to obfuscate others. But I think maybe European people may want stronger leaders, and they may have a chance to select them.
Last one, a little bit more upbeat. Tell me, what are the 3 good things, opportunities you see for the next couple of years? And on the downside, if you can name 3, maybe you can't. And on the downside, what are the 3 big risks you actually see around the corner for us Europeans?
Well, the geopolitical risks are there, and we are not mastering them, of course, as we see. So what's happening in the Middle East is very close to us. The risk that of complacency, I think that's a big risk, that politicians think that now the crisis is over, the ECB is taking care of everything, and we know from experience that the crisis comes and goes. So there may be new bouts of instability, and we need to be ready for that. I think the third risk is maybe a slowdown in Asia, China. We have to be ready for that. The opportunity is that things are changing in Europe. It's just that it's too slow, but they are changing in many parts of Europe. So Europe is becoming slowly more competitive, and when the crisis will be over, Europe will be stronger. I'm quite convinced about that. And Europe is a country, is an area where it is interesting to invest. And in fact, that's part of the problem, because the euro, for instance, is not going down. So this means that there are people who are buying Europe all over the world. They don't want to be trapped only in dollar. They want to have also euro opportunities. And this keeps a lot of pressure on the euro exchange rate. This shows that Europe is competitive. It's just that there are still too many risks that haven't been fully addressed. I think if we continue on the way we have been continuing, I'm relatively optimistic. It's just that it's taking a bit too long to get there.